There's a kind of dumbing down in the stories. It's like, why are you doing that? Isn't your purpose to accompany your child up the hill? So if you just give them the most little satisfaction of the moment, you're not doing them a service. Fairy tales are really the closest thing besides the Bible, right, that we have that are like Bible stories. They are these very short stories that compress a lot of information in them and that have almost infinite levels of understanding. So you're a kid, you hear these stories that have all this insight in it, but you don't have access to the insight. Whether you know it or not, it'll kind of tune you. That's what fairy tales are about.
A lot of the newer animated movies, I'm just like, this is terrible. The old Disney movies didn't have that as much.
No, the whole Disney movies were made in a way, again, that would appeal both to the children, and to the adult. You watch The Lion King, and that's not even that old of a Disney movie, right? It's like the 90s. As an adult, you really see, these deep patterns of mythology and religious storytelling. And if only we could reawaken that type of storytelling.
Jonathan Pageau, welcome to my podcast.
It's great to see you, Mikhaila.
Nice to have you on again.
Yeah, and in person this time.
Yeah, this is way better.
Yeah, definitely.
Much more comfortable. So I invited you on because last time you came on, we talked about your fairy tale book that you had put out, which is right here, Snow White and the Widow Queen. And you've recently published a new one, Jack and the Fallen Giants.
Yeah, so it's a version of Jack and the Beanstalk, trying to have a little bit of a twist on it. But it's basically the Jack and the Beanstalk story that we all know as kids, with some elements, let's say some allusions to kind of biblical symbolism, and then a few things in it that are, at least in my insight, trying to help people see what the story is about, because it's such a weird story. Mm-hmm. I love that story when I was a kid, but it was so strange. There were so many things about it that I didn't understand, because even as like a 10-year-old boy, I thought, well, isn't stealing wrong? Like, why is Jack going up there and stealing from the giants? Then also, why does he steal like gold and then a chicken that lays golden eggs, and then ultimately he steals a harp? It's like, why does he steal a harp? It's so odd.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, and so I've been kind of meditating on this story for obviously my whole life, just like I meditated on Snow White and the other fairy tales that I'm writing, and I kind of think I figured it out. At least one aspect of it, and so trying to kind of add some of that richness to the story itself,
So what is the chicken laying the golden egg?
Yeah, no, it's like, what is going on? So if you think about it, the story of Jack, for those who don't know it, Jack is a poor boy. His father is not there. He's raised only by his mother. So she's a widow probably, or abandoned woman. And so because of that, she's poor, and their family's poor. And that poverty plays itself out because their cow is running out of milk, and so you can add, it's a really complex symbolism. Like, some of it also has to do with the fact that his mother doesn't have a man, so that idea of like running out of milk, or like running out of fertility, running out of world, right? That's kind of what it seems to be alluding to. But then also, in some ways, he's kind of in this feminine world because he doesn't have a father, and he has a mother and a cow, and now he's about to discover what it is. It's a coming of age story. He's about to kind of become a man. And so that's all of the elements have to do with that. And so his mother says you have to sell the cow because she doesn't produce milk anymore. He goes into town, and then he trades it for a bunch of seeds, which is already pretty weird, right? It's like, why is he trading it for seeds? And there's a lot of stuff going on in the story. There are many levels. One of them is that he's also becoming a man. And so he's discovering seed. That's part of what's going on. Like, it's his connection to masculinity, right? Like a 12-year-old boy or something. But it's not just sexual. We have to be careful not to think that it's just about sex. It's not. It's about identity, because that's what a seed is, right? A seed it's like a pattern, an identity of the plant, but the plant isn't there, right? Inside the seed is hidden the whole pattern of how the plant's going to play out, but it's not. You don't have the plant. So it's the opposite of a cow in a way, right? Cow's just a bunch of meat, like a bunch of milk. And now he has this little thing, this little seed, and he trades one for the other.
Like potential. Yeah,
like identity without body yet, It's kind of like if you have a vision for something, like a plan, but you haven't played it out yet, right? You have to be a special kind of person to understand that actually an idea or a plan is really valuable.
Yes.
Because it's by that plan that you can make other things happen. So that's kind of what he's discovering, but he doesn't totally get it yet, you know. He's also a little boy, he brings it home, and he's all excited. He's got magic seed, he's got magic beans, and shows his mom, and his mom's like,
what did you do?
Basically, okay, now we have nothing to eat, so what do we do? But the seed is also the pattern of food. It's not really much food yet. It's just you can't live off a few beans, but if you understand the pattern of food, then maybe you could have food forever. Right? But that takes a while, it takes time, and he has to figure that out. And so that's how it starts. So it's about that. It's about in some way just becoming a man, and then also discovering what meaning is and purpose is and pattern is, but then not knowing quite how to play with that yet. So his mom throws the seed out, then in the morning wakes up with a giant beanstalk. So yes, there is an aspect of that which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, like a little bit of a young boy wakes up with a giant beanstalk. It's part of the story, it's part of the story. But it's not just, again, it's obviously not just about sex. It's that symbolism is included into the whole idea of discovering what meaning is, you know. And so he starts to climb up the beanstalk, and then he finds gold, right? So a good way to understand it is he finds value, right? Something that's valuable. And, you know, gold is better than food in some ways, right? Obviously, food is more immediate, right? You need food to live, but gold's better than food because I can buy food with gold.
Yeah, you buy anything.
Not bad.
Yeah.
So he gets that. He understands it's like a hierarchy of patterns. Comes down with the gold, gives it to his mom, but then what happens? If you just have a bunch of money, the money runs out, right? It's not enough.
So does he go up and down multiple times?
Yeah, he goes up and down like 3 times. So he goes up, gets the gold, brings it to his mom, but then the money runs out. So he's missing something. So what's better than gold, right? It's like, what's better than gold is how you get gold.
Yeah.
That's much better. So that's why he goes up, and now he finds a chicken that lays golden eggs. Because he's not now getting money, he's getting basically the way to get money. That's what he's getting. It's like, you know, we say, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, but teach him how to fish and he'll eat forever. That's basically what Jack is dealing with. He's kind of figuring that out. Comes back down again, and then it's the weirdest part. That's the part that took me years to understand, which is the third time he goes up, he gets a golden harp, a magical harp. And I'm thinking, what the hell is the relationship between the gold, the chicken that lays golden eggs, and the golden harp, right? And I'm pretty sure I think I figured it out, which is it has to do with what he discovered at the outset. It has to do with pattern, right? Because that's what music is. You know, there's an ancient idea that the cosmos makes music. We call it the music of the spheres. A way to understand it is that there are patterns in the world, that there are patterns that are like meta patterns, that aren't just how you make money or money that can buy food, but it's something like the pattern of everything. You know, maybe that's a way to understand it, like the logos, right? And that's what he gets. That's the final thing he gets, is he kind of gets the music that can now, in some ways, make it possible for him to do anything. You know, and you have people like that. I'm talking now very practically. Like, you'll meet people that have figured something out about the world that means that they can then apply it to almost anything. Like, they're not specialists, right? They're not experts on anything, but they've kind of figured out something about how the world works.
Yeah.
Which means that they'll always be successful because it's a meta pattern, right? It's not just. So that's the story.
Cool.
That's basically the story of Jack. Yeah.
That's way more interesting than my version of Jack and the Beanstalk.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I just remember it from when I was a kid and was just like, yeah, it's a funny story with giants. Do you go into what the giants represent?
So
are those problems?
Yeah, so
or
the
something?
giants, these are also the questions that I asked myself when I was younger and I was growing up. I was like, why are giants in heaven? Right? Isn't heaven the place for like angels and spirits and stuff? Aren't giants usually like hidden underground in caves and stuff? And so I think the best way to understand it is the giant is something like the obstacle of masculinity. The aspect of masculinity that's an obstacle, or the aspect of pattern, or the aspect of purpose that's an obstacle to you. So if you think about it, anybody's dealt with this, you're hired in a company, then now you realize that the people above you, some of them, they actually want to prevent you from succeeding because they see you as a threat to their order, And so this young boy that comes in, and all of a sudden there are these men that are there, and now these men are like giants that will devour you because all they want is basically, it's like, you see that when people find jobs too. It's like, I love the fact that you work. As long as it credits me, then we're good to go. And so I'm going to eat you, right? I'm going to devour you, and I'm going to use your energy for myself. And so that's the image of the giant that wants to eat the boy. Like, it's like, yeah, this boy is in my house. I'm going to take his energy and his power for myself. So in some ways, it's the obstacle of, so it's all the corruption of the hierarchy, all the officials that are just doing things for their own, or the boss that doesn't really want to help people kind of move up, or doesn't even care about the purpose of the company, but just wants to basically gather power and influence for themselves. So in that case, you can kind of understand how the man in heaven, to some extent, can be something like a giant, right? Like a king or something. And so that's the way that I understand the giant in the heavens.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Why did I decide to build an online university? Well,
there is a crisis now in higher education.
The president of Harvard University resigned today, weeks
Does
after
calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct?
We have a problem of affordability and cost, spiraling student loans. We have a groupthink emerging, and that warps the entire academic enterprise.
I experimented with putting my lectures online and found that I could teach far more people at very low cost than I could at the university. And I thought, well, why not scale that? What I'm hoping to do is to find the best lecturers in the world and to bring them to as wide as possible an audience.
He came to me and he basically said, I want you to do the best course that you've always wanted to do.
We want to bring you the highest quality education possible at the lowest possible price.
It's extremely high-level content that anybody can use to educate themselves, and it's available to everybody.
Well, that would be good. I think it's funny, because I got canceled at the university, so I could try to return the favor.
Because you get bosses or you get people that you work with, whether they're above or below you, that do understand that the more everybody can succeed, the more everybody can succeed.
Yeah.
Right? If you end up pushing people down and taking credit for what they do, then things eventually fail. Like, you can't operate a business like that. But there are definitely a lot of people out there that do grow up and they want that power, even though that I don't think that's actually what leads to success. Do you have any idea?
So
what happens to people?
It really is like, it's the sin. It's the ultimate sin. It's the sin of pride. It's the sin the sin of the devil. It's the sin of Adam and Eve. It's, basically the root of sin is thinking, this is for me, right? This is not serving some higher goal. Like, it's not serving some higher purpose. It's like, no. This is mine and this is for me. So something that's actually good, right, becomes perverted because you're trying to capture it for yourself. And that's and that's what leads to corruption, and that's what leads to companies failing or states failing, is because the policeman, right, instead of thinking, as a policeman, I'm there to serve order and here to serve the higher good, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm in a position of authority.
Yeah.
I'm in a position of power. That's actually an opportunity for me to gather that to myself, to become like a little tyrant, like a little micro tyrant. So you can have tyrants like that at every level. We often think that we always think that like the highest level of authorities, they're the ones that are corrupt. They're the ones that fall into corruption. But we do it for petty reasons. We do it in families. We do it in all kinds of parents who, how can I say this? Parents who are jealous of their children. All kinds of perverted situations where people don't realize that, in fact, like you said, the best result comes when everybody is kind of brought along. Like, when you kind of lift everybody with you, that's when you actually get the most for all of us, right? For everyone involved, you get the most. And successful companies, right, you see that usually that's how they at least started. that there was something about the excitement and the energy in the company where everybody felt like they were able to do great things and were accomplishing wonderful things. That's why they kind of raise up, and then sometimes they become giants. And once they're giants, then they start to get corrupted and this kind of
I don't think it takes very many people to get into some sort of organization for that to happen.
Yeah.
Like even just one bad apple can take out a number of people around them. Because I suppose in order to aim for the highest good, you also have to have trust in everybody you're working with to be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Or at least
Which is tricky.
Moving towards the same goal.
Yeah.
That's right. But it's wonderful when you see it. It's like a dance, right? You see people working together and they're so excited, and there's this just joy of being together and moving towards a purpose. And you can feel it. Like you can actually sometimes feel it in the room when you walk into places like that. And then you can also feel the opposite. You know, when you walk into a place and it's like
airports.
Everybody's just like, and nobody wants to step out of line. Nobody wants to say anything. Nobody, you know, and so you can see it. And you're right that leads ultimately to failure. Sometimes it takes a while because you got a giant. Giants take a long time to starve. So if you have big, huge things that get corrupted, then they kind of surf for a while, and they just basically it takes a while for them to decompose. So sadly, sometimes it takes a while for the corruption to show in giant systems, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's weird because we move from Jack to talking about this, but that's what fairy tales are about. Fairy tales are really the closest thing besides the Bible, right, that we have that are like Bible stories, in the sense that they are these very short stories that compress a lot of information in them and that have almost infinite levels of understanding. And like you said, when you're a kid and you hear the fairy tales, you don't understand any of that. And it's actually totally fine. You actually don't have to understand any of that. Because in some ways, it is similar to the story of Jack. It's more like a seed being planted in you, right? So you're a kid, you hear these stories that have all this insight in it, but you don't have access to the insight. You're just basically having a seed planted in you, and then that will play itself out. Whether you know it or not, it'll kind of tune you, right? Like a tuning fork.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Or like the Bible, you can understand it on different levels and still pick up the same overall pattern.
You get it. So basically, like, you know, the story of Jack at the simple level for a child, it's like, this is really exciting. Young boy defies difficult odds, goes up into the heavens, faces these dangerous giants, you know, and nonetheless is able to come out of it but be careful, watch out for those giants, watch out for those big guys that want to devour you, watch out for the bullies, watch out for all that stuff. And so just implicitly then the child, you know, it's obviously not just one story, but like in being exposed to these different types of stories will make them attentive, and will recognize, even without knowing it, you know, that giant that wants to eat you. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that, you know, that's what's going on here.
I think that's so important too, for people to understand the difference between good and evil at that level. Yeah. Because I know, and we talked about this in our last podcast a bit about Disney changing, you know, core parts of fairy tales and getting rid of, I think a lot of what they got rid of was the evil part. Yeah. Where everything was kind of nuanced. Really, you're like, there's, the bad guy's kind of bad, the good guy's kind of bad. Like, everyone's just kind of middle of the road, and there's no lessons. And then you go out into the real world, and you're like, at some point you're going to come across evil, and you're going to be like, that can't be real.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think that what's important to understand is that the evil, just because people have reasons, let's say, to be evil. Like actually, we all have reasons to be evil. But that doesn't justify the action. It makes the evil still evil, no matter what. Like, even if you, as a person, had a difficult childhood or abused or whatever it is that you went through, it still doesn't justify that you take that. You know, and your dad has talked about this. He's talked about how, you know, if everybody who's lived some kind of abuse became evil, you know, we'd basically, after a few iterations, everybody would be evil. That's not what happens. Actually, most people that go through very difficult situations are able to somehow turn it for the best, or at least a little, like at least say, oh, I'm going to do better than my situation that I grew up in, or I'm going to do better than the things I've experienced. And then there are a few people that see it as a way to justify their resentment, as a way to justify their evil behavior. Yeah, for sure.
I think that's one of the things I learned later, because I was always, especially when I was not well, I had a lot of compassion for people who went through difficult things. And in just like, I guess I was trying to understand, like I had a roommate who was insanely awful. Like it was a bad situation. My mom came in and met him and was like, yeah, he's crazy, and left, right? Although she left me there. But anyway, I had a number of roommates, but he was, good luck, Mikhaila.
Figure it out, Mikhaila.
Welcome to the real world. And I remember being like, well, his mom, like I found out later, his mom was really hard on him as a kid. Like things were bad in his household, but he was also, I think I was 19 at the time. I had a number of roommates. I think he was 22 or 23. So he was one of the older people in the like res we were kind of in. And I remember eventually thinking, you're too old to use that as an excuse. Like you can't use it as an excuse. Everybody has an excuse about why they could be bad, or why their life is hard, or why their life is miserable, but you can't make everyone else's life miserable because your life was miserable. Like that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But I feel like I had too much, I don't know why, maybe because my dad's so compassionate. So I like growing up, I learned the reasons behind why people act the way they act. And I think it took me until my mid-20s to be like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what happened to you.
Yeah, and also I think that in your case, it's exemplary because you also suffered so much when you were a child, and it could have been an excuse for you to become, angry at life.
I saw that too with other chronically ill people, because when I like went to the hospital, I would meet people, and like this is like teenagers that are sick, and they were really sick. And I remember some of them were really angry and mean. And I remember being like, I know that that's because they're sick, but like, you can't do that. It's just going to ruin their lives. And I know Dad told me that from a young age, was like, you got to be careful here, that you don't end up seriously resentful.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had a similar, there was a young boy in my neighborhood when I was a child. It's sad because I just remember it so much. He was burnt. He got burnt because he tried to light a fire with gasoline as a very young child.
No.
Just melted, right? And he wore this like plastic mask, right?
Oh my gosh.
Over his face and stuff. And he was just the worst bully. I mean, he was so mean, And I mean, obviously it's understandable at that age, but it's something to think about, because we were all scared of him. And it was weird because, it was like he was embodying his own accident, right? It's like he looked really scary, but then he was also really mean, So it's weird because I don't know what happened to him, but I always hope that he came to some peace at some point, and kind of found some balance in his own life. But yeah, it's rough. Yeah, we all have, some people more than others, obviously, we all have a path down to resentment, like towards resentment that's possible for us,
Yeah. Nobody doesn't, right? That's just part of what, like, being human.
Yeah.
Is that everybody can be bad pretty easily.
Yeah, and you can see it. It's interesting to see in the fairy tales, like we talked a little bit about Snow White, but in Snow White you can see that happening, right, to the queen, where the queen starts to lose her charm, starts to lose her beauty, and then immediately becomes resentful and jealous and murderous, ultimately. I mean, obviously it's extreme, but you can understand how there are so many paths down that line where if you let your own desires or something take over, there are dark things down the road. So it's important as we raise our kids to always, can I say this, always help them understand that difficulty is an opportunity to grow. And sometimes, because we can't help it, right? We're all going to have challenges. But that's really the only way to look at it positively, even though sometimes it seems unsurmountable or impossible. Any other way to look at it from your own perspective leads to dark places, Yeah.
So where can people go to find your books?
Okay, so for now we're selling that on my store. So people can go to thesymbolicworld.com and click on store. We're selling them through our Shopify. We're offering for people who are willing to sign up for our mailing list right now. We're actually offering free PDFs of some of the books that we're publishing.
Oh, cool.
And so we're just trying to kind of like gather energy. We decided to do it this way because I've actually had offers to publish it with publishing companies.
I'm sure, yeah.
But, with the state of culture right now, we just want to have control over what we're doing. Want to make sure that we don't have to cede any terrain, that we can really tell the best stories and the most beautiful. And also, like, we're non-compromised with the beauty. We have so many illustrations in this book.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
It's not a normal level of illustrations for like a kid's book. We've had like at every other page, we have illustrations. And so we just wanted to do something. And like the covers are like cloth bound with, gold foil.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Like it would be very difficult to get
They're like embossed,
a normal,
right?
a normal publisher to do that. But we're trying to, in some ways, go against the grain of just digital. And we have nothing against digital. We just put out a kind of semi-animated audiobook of the Snow White book.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. But we also want people to enjoy sitting in bed with their kids, with the book in their hands and feeling that sense of kind of almost like a precious object, and helping the children kind of know that some things have value.
Yeah.
Like the story has value, but we treat the book with respect because it's also beautifully made and everything. So that's kind of the tack we're taking. And the reaction has been really amazing. People are happy about it. Like I'm getting messages, even like educators are writing me and saying, that they've been waiting for books like this because the state of kids publishing is quite dismal. Yeah, as a young mom, I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting, most of the books I got for Scarlet were like books I read growing up.
Yeah.
It was pretty easy. I just avoided anything after I don't know. Not 2002, 1999, I don't know.
Yeah. Around there, at some point, it started to get really dismal.
Yeah.
And it's not just it's weird because it's a mix of things. On the one hand, there's a kind of dumbing down in the stories, and it's difficult because they dumb down a lot of the stories because they realize that this is more the level of the child that's listening. But it's like, why are you doing that? Isn't your purpose to accompany your child up the hill? So if you just give them something that hits them exactly at the level that will in some ways give them the most little satisfaction of the moment, you're not doing them a service. Mm-hmm. That's why the old fairy tales or the old stories for kids, they're sometimes a little difficult.
They're pretty intense.
And because you're also asking of the child to kind of make an effort. I read, I remember when I was 13, I read The Jungle Book, right, by Rudyard Kipling. And my teacher at the time said, kids used to read that when they were 10. And that was normal. But it's not an easy book. It's easy obviously for us, for adults, but for a 10-year-old to read something like that.
Yeah.
And it shows you that we've in some ways dumbed down the story so much and so what we've tried to do in our books is make sure that there's enough there for even a 4-year-old to find it interesting, to love the illustrations, to just be attracted to the basic story, but always have little things in it that will, kind of point up. So that you could read it again at 13 and go, oh, okay, all right, yeah, I didn't notice that. And then you can read it again at 40 or 30 or something, and then also have that same experience where it's kind of pulling you up towards more insight about what these stories are.
There's something of substance there.
Yeah.
That makes it way more interesting for the parents too. If you guys ever consume alcohol, ever, it should probably be vodka, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. I drink probably once a month, but this supplement eliminates the hangover. People in Japan have been using it for thousands of years, and the white man just doesn't know. I hope YouTube doesn't suppress me for that. Anyway, we managed to purify it and put a high dose in a pill, so you get half a year's worth of this with one order if you don't drink very often. It helps save your brain from the toxic effects of alcohol. And if you like it, please leave a review. I love reading the reviews. You guys know I don't push supplements because most of them are a complete waste of money. This one isn't. It has no fillers or extra ingredients, and we have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you're safe. You could even try it and then complain and get your money back, even if it works. Don't do that though. please. But give it a shot. Fullerhealth.com. Enjoy the rest of this episode. Even finding recent movies to watch with kids is hard.
Yeah.
It's like, there are some movies that are great. Like The Incredibles is a pretty good story.
Yeah.
The first Incredibles is pretty good. And that's enjoyable in all ranges. But a lot of the newer animated movies, I'm just like, this is terrible. It's painful and terrible.
Yeah.
And like, the old Disney movies didn't have that as much.
No,
So
the whole Disney movies were made in a way, again, that would appeal both to the children, and to the adult, because they were beautifully crafted. The stories were well crafted as well. The characters, there were levels of depth kind of hidden under the superficial.
Yeah.
Like, you watch The Lion King, and that's not even that old of a Disney movie, right? It's like the 90s. And you can, as an adult, you really see all of these, these deep patterns of mythology and religious storytelling. But as a kid, obviously, you just love the silly animals, and the characters are well drawn. So, and if only we could, reawaken that type of storytelling.
I think it's probably, I mean, you're helping, obviously. I think it's happening. We were talking the other day. I read something online about how there's a resurgence of bookstores, because all the bookstores were closing. I know in downtown Toronto, a whole bunch of the big bookstores I liked closed down because nobody was buying books, especially during COVID. But people stopped buying physical books as much. And Amazon, of course, wiped out a bunch of them. But apparently they're opening up again. I think people are really missing the high quality, tangible, real things.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, that's why I think we're aiming up with these books. We're saying, okay, if someone is now being deliberate about that and is saying, okay, I love the feeling of the actual book in my hand, sitting in bed, that even the smell of the book, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Books have like a certain smell. All of that, I think, then we can say, all right, so let's make people happy. Like, let's actually make nice books so that if that's what they want, then we'll give them something powerful. But it's like, I hate reading on Kindle. Like, I have one, but I really struggle.
I struggle too. I
just
kind of hate it. I know people who love their Kindle too. I kind of hate it.
I mean,
I
it's
was
very
so
practical,
attached.
right?
It's practical. You can store a whole bunch of books. It's way easier for traveling.
Yeah.
But I used to, I don't know. I got so attached to books as a kid. Like all my Nancy Drew books with the old covers. And I just had, I don't know, more of an emotional connection.
Because you spend time with a book. It's weird because, my wife, she's not someone who read that much, let's say, when she was younger. And, I have these books in my library. And she's like, "What? You've read them, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, why don't you get rid of them? Why are you keeping them?" And you're like, "Oh, why am I keeping the books that I've read already?" And you realize that the reason why you keep them is because you spend time with these books. There's like a memory attached to them. There's something about just knowing that they're there or seeing that they're there that's like a memento of the moment that I read it when I was younger.
That is so true.
Yeah.
I wonder if you get the same thing with Kindle. With a Kindle.
I would think I probably a lot less.
I was reading this Kindle book under a tree at this certain time. I don't know if the memories would stick as much. I definitely have that. I have a whole bunch of books from Toronto in storage. So I still have them, but I have like an old Edgar Allan Poe set that I remember getting when I was like 13 off of eBay. And it was really old. I was like, that was really cool. Yeah, I miss those. I got to get those out of storage, obviously.
And it's odd because you think, and then the book has a whole other life to it. And there's something about that too.
Yeah, seeing people's notes in it too.
Yeah.
You're like, that was 50 years ago. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and also it's weird because these are very subtle experiences, but the like when you walk into your house, you have this experience where you kind of scan the house, and there's something about everything that makes you know you're home, right? And it's very subtle. Like especially if it's in a home that you've lived in for a very long time, like, little creases in the floor, like all these things that just kind of make you feel like you're home. And I think that books do that too, because you're just, even without reading them, you're in your living room and you just glance at them, you see them like kind of shimmering, in the bookshelf. And all of that presence makes you grounded. It's like, oh yeah, this is my life. Like, this is my life, this is my home, this is my place. That's a little difficult to, explain, but I think if people pay attention to it, they can kind of see that is the way that homes are made. Like we keep pictures of our family members, we keep pictures of people we love. We put up things on the walls that have specific meaning to us. But I think books play that role too.
That's so interesting. I haven't thought about that. I've moved so many times. Like I moved quite a bit when I was a kid. Like mom and dad moved a lot. But then we were in a house, like the house in Toronto, for a good 12 years until I moved to Montreal. But I've moved every 6 months since then.
Wow.
Except for in the last year when I moved just once in the last year instead of every 6 months. But it's been so I haven't had that, where all the creeks are and you can recognize. I haven't recognized a house since I was 17 or 18. And I think in the last couple of years I was I don't need that. Maybe you don't need that.
Yeah.
But then you talking about it, I was like, no, maybe I do miss my Edgar Allan Poe books that I've been trekking around from city to city in storage, things like that.
But I think there's also a time for different things, as your kids kind of grow up and you realize that they need that sense of home, that they need, let's say, their room to have familiarity, the old stuffed animals that the kids stay attached to even until they're teenagers. They don't want to admit it, but there's all of this sense of home. Probably you'll also start to feel it again. I think it's normal in your 20s. When I was in my 20s, we lived, we moved around. We lived in Africa for 7 years. We were constantly moving and stuff, and we in some ways didn't need that as much either. And then as our kids got older, then that sense of home became more.
Okay, so maybe it's an age thing.
Possibly,
or a
possibly.
having kids thing.
Well, you'll see. I mean, you're in that moment now. You'll kind of see it, and you'll experience it if and your child sometimes will force you to some extent, because children, we tried with our kids very young. We tried to keep them on that travel. We moved them around so much, but at some point, the kids themselves tell you, I want home. I want pattern. I want something stable. I like going into my room and recognizing things, where they are. Things go in their place and stuff. Kids really thrive on pattern. They thrive on stability, and if you offer them that, then at some point they'll be ready for the adventure too, right? They'll be ready to go outside of their home and to move out into the wild and have their own adventures, and then come back and have that sense of memory. In 2019, my house was flooded. This massive accident where the dike in our town broke.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And then within an hour, we had to rush out of the house because the water was coming. We could see it coming. And the police were, the sirens, and they had megaphones and were telling everybody to get out of the house.
Oh my gosh.
When we got in the car, there was water under the wheels of the car, and we left. And then the water filled the whole basement. And ruined our house pretty much.
Yeah.
And so.
What happened?
Well, sorry, what happened after that?
No, how did that happen?
Well, because it's one of those stories that Jordan, that your dad would tell, is that they built a dike, and they didn't keep it up, and then once every decade, once every 50 years or 100 years or whatever, then there's a massive amount of water that comes. That's why they built the dike in the first place, because they knew that most of the time it was fine, but then once in a while there would be the surge, and then the dike just broke because it hadn't been kept up, and then everybody's blaming everybody else, and it's like the provincial government saying it's the fault of the city, and the city's saying, well, we sent you a request for money, but you didn't answer, blah blah blah.
And this is Quebec, right?
Yeah, that is definitely Quebec. And so we're talking about 2,500 homes. Around 10,000 people, more than that.
That's
that
crazy.
Got evacuated, yeah.
Wow.
We lived out of our house for a year and a half. And then I lost my whole library, by the way, my entire library. And my son lost everything that he owned, and people live that when they go through a fire and stuff. And it's, for my kids, it is probably the single most traumatic thing that they went through. And they experienced what we call domicide, right? all of a sudden they thought that there was this place for them that was safe, that they recognized that was home. And then in one instant, it was gone. And they struggle with that. Like we struggle with the kind of mental health downstream with our kids for years, you know. And my wife has been deliberate about rebuilding our house in a way that would be a home for them, you know, and going out of her way to like ask each of the kids, like when we rebuilt the house and we rebuilt their rooms, you know, what would you like? What would be something that would make you feel at home there? And she went through went through crazy amount of effort to like get the kids to be able to go through that, and it did help though, and now we all feel like it's our home. But
did that take a while? A couple of years?
Yeah, it took a while. But it's important for people to understand that these things are important, you know, that this sense of home, it's not one that you can totally put your finger on. Like you can't say, if I remove this or if I put this in, then it's not home anymore. It's more like a general just experience that kids have. Like obviously you don't have to keep things the same all the time. Like you can change your kids' furniture, you can do that stuff, but there has to be some sense of consistency that your kids can still feel like this is where they belong, you know. Definitely something to think about.
I like that. Well, I'm not planning on moving again. I've moved plenty of times. I don't need to move anymore. As long as no dikes break here. It shouldn't happen. I'm in a desert haven. It should be fine.
Yeah, what's the worst thing that can happen in Arizona?
Monsoons happen.
Oh, okay.
Monsoon season. Yeah. And things flood with that, but not like, you know, Miami or something. Yeah. So glad I'm out of there. That was a crazy place to live. Okay, I've got kind of a random question. It's not fairy tale related, but I wrote it down. So my knowledge of Christianity is like from a Protestant perspective, more and more. Like that's what I'm familiar with, and that's what seems to resonate with me. I know almost nothing about saints.
Yeah.
We were talking about saints a bit yesterday. I know almost nothing about them other than kind of stories my dad would tell me when I was younger about like St. George and the dragon. Yeah. Like that's a story I know, but I don't really know anything about saints. What's the purpose? Like why are they important if you have a relationship with Jesus?
So we could phrase this in a few ways. One of the aspects is that when Christ came into the world, he told us that we would rule with him. You know, he told us that in some ways we would become like angels, you know, not become angels directly, but become something like angels. Not angels also in the sense of just messengers, but angels in the sense of principalities, right? There's a sense in the Old Testament that God set up these principalities, these angels in the world to kind of manage the world. They were kind of like lower tier management, you know. And the idea is that because of Christ, then we are called to become that, right? To rule with him, to sit in the divine council, right? And so one of the things we're seeing with the saints is we're kind of seeing that happen already. We're seeing some people that are very close to Jesus in some ways participate in the kingdom with him. So it's not just like an individual relationship. It really is a body. And in the body, there are some people that play roles. And that's true in the world here. But the way that the traditional Christians understand it is there isn't two churches. There isn't like the church here and then the church in heaven, let's say. There's only one church. There's only one body, right? There's only one Christ. And that body is united. And the people that are with God, like the people that are no longer in their bodies, we don't understand them as being dead. We think that they're alive, right? That they're fully alive in Christ and participating in the salvation of the world. Like they are ruling with him already. And so that is a way to kind of understand what the role that the saints play. And the other one is also related to intercession, which is that in the Old Testament, you really don't see intercession. You don't see someone in the Old Testament like could you pray, asking someone to pray for them. Like, it just doesn't happen. That's not how it works in the Old Testament. It's like, no, go to the temple, offer your sacrifice, and then, go to the common worship, you sing your psalms, you do the rituals, and that's just how it functions. But one of the things that Christ brings about is the idea that we can pray for each other, and that to pray for each other is already, like I said, to in some ways participate in the kingdom of heaven. Because the question you asked me about the saints, you could ask about intercession itself.
Yeah, same question.
You could say, why are you asking someone to pray for you? Like, why would you ask your pastor or your mother or your friend to pray for you when you could just pray to God? What's the point? Right? And it's missing the entire point of what salvation is and what the church is, which is that one of the aspects of the way in which we're being saved is by the love we have for each other. Right? It's by the fact that we are interceding for each other. We are, asking God to and so in the way that, so there are like little examples of intercessions in the Old Testament. Like a good example is when Abraham intercedes for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Where he asks God, like, don't destroy the city. And he's like, God is like, if I find so many just or whatever. So in some ways, now we all can play that role. We can all pray to God and ask God to have mercy, and ask God to help our friends and to help others.
That makes sense to me.
But then we also believe that there's no separation in the church. So the people that have shown in their life to be particularly close to Christ, if you look at the apostles or you look at certain saints, that they are in some ways the best people to pray for us. In the book of James, it says that the prayer of the just is efficient. That is, a just person, their prayers are more powerful than the prayers of someone who's just chaotic and messed up. And that's a real thing. And so we know that St. Peter or St. Paul were just in the sense that they are close to Christ, because we saw it in the testimony of their life until their death, and they kind of showed it to us. And so that's the way to kind of understand it's like an extension of what Protestants understand to be the idea that we all pray for each other and that we ask each other to pray for each other. It's just that we see it as a bigger.
Okay, I can understand that. I think there was one line, if I was more biblically literate, this would be a much more interesting conversation. But there was one line.
All these Protestants saying, Mikhaila, say this, Mikhaila, say this.
Yeah.
Why aren't you quoting this verse?
I'm definitely not there yet. Isn't there one line in the Bible? Oh my gosh, let me see if I can Google it and find it.
Is it there's one?
Yes,
there's one mediator,
it's that
the
one.
The mediator verse. That says that there's one mediator to the Father, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Is our mediator.
So then how does that get around? Doesn't like praying to a saint to intercede on your behalf, doesn't that get around that verse?
Well, so then the question you have to ask is, why then does Christ ask us to pray for each other? Right? Why is it that the people in the New Testament prayed for each other? Why is it that Christ healed people through St. Peter and St. Paul? Right? Why is it that St. Peter could go to a crippled person, and say, right,
I mean, I guess
I heal you in the name of Christ?
Wouldn't that be because, okay, seems like a silly response, but wouldn't that be when they were on earth? And then once they're in heaven, you just go directly to Jesus? Like honest question. That's what I would see the difference as. Obviously, I don't know how it works in the spiritual realm.
So how can I say this? Like, the verse itself, if what it means is that we only go straight to Jesus and we don't go through anybody else, then it doesn't matter whether they're in the world or outside of the world. Like, we do, let's say, we do go to other people. Like, we do ask other people for help. We do ask other people to pray for us. But the way we have to understand it.
Okay, you're saying it's either or.
Well,
you either have no mediator, or you.
Yeah, or you
can have any mediator.
And it's not. And so the way to understand it is that it's not that the mediation, let's say, we could use that word, we could use other words.
Or intercedes,
The intercession of the saints, and the fact that some people are vehicles for the love of God to us. It's a good way to understand it. It's like something that mediates is something that is in between. So you have God, and you have you, and you have something in between. But every time someone shows the love of God to you, right, they are in a way mediating that love. But it doesn't remove the fact that Christ is the only mediator to the Father. Right? Christ is the only mediator to the Father, and to the extent that we are in Christ, we participate in his life, and we participate in his ministry, and we pray for one another in the way that he prays for us to the Father. It's like that is just, it's like it's an extension of the idea of in some ways of the kingdom, like of that the church is a kingdom in which God gives us these authorities, God gives us the power to pray and to mediate his love for others. And it's a wonderful, beautiful thing, because it's not about just me and God. It's about this whole body coming together in love and in forgiveness and in prayer in order to kind of lift each other up. But it doesn't, at least for the traditional Christians, it doesn't change anything to the fact that we understand that a way to understand it would be like you have the Father and the Son descends, and then the Son becomes the anchor point, and then we are called to participate in the life of the Son. We're called to be his body. We're called to be the continuation of that ministry in the world, but it doesn't take anything away from Christ. And if you read like the prayers to the saints, if you read the prayers to the saints, you'll see that we always acknowledge their place. We always say, like, we actually don't say to Christ, pray for us, because we pray to Christ, and he is kind of stands, in the presence of the Father and kind of brings our prayers, but we don't ask him to pray for us because he is God, but we ask the saints to pray for us. And that's how we ask them to help us, is we say, pray for me. And sometimes there are some, let's say, prayers to the saints or songs to the saints where we celebrate them, where we say, but usually if you look at the structure of the celebration, it's always something like, I don't know, we say, we're grateful for St. Peter for what he's doing, and we thank God for making St. Peter who he is, and we thank St. Peter for helping us see God better. And so it's like, the order's pretty clear. We're not treating St. Peter as a god. We're basically saying we're so grateful that we have these characters that are like bright lights that help us see the love of God, the will of God in particular spheres, in particular areas, So that's the way to understand it.
Okay, cool. Well, that helped. That's interesting. There's so many, I don't know. It's all very interesting.
But I understand this is definitely like a lot of the people that are listening that are very, let's say, Protestant evangelical. I understand that they'll struggle with that they'll resist it, and it's understandable. But I would say that the best way to get at it is to understand that although God has saved us completely and truly through Christ and through the incarnation, that the people around us can still become little mirrors for God's love for us. And that is not a bad thing. It's actually a beautiful, wonderful thing that fills creation up with God's love.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think that's right. I think that's very right. Okay, well that answers that question. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, probably.
I get the Protestant argument. I think part of what I've heard is, but which you already addressed, isn't praying to saints treating them more like an idol? Like, why not go directly to Jesus? But I can also see where you're coming from with, I get it. I can understand both sides.
But but this is important to understand, and in some ways it's related to the Jack and the Beanstalk story, actually, interestingly enough.
Okay, let's go.
That's related to this idea of the giants, which is that God has set up an order in the world, right? And then you could call it like an order procession of his love into the world. And there are people like authorities, like pastors or priests in the Old Testament, priests and prophets that are somehow chosen by God to be vehicles for God's grace, for God's message, for God's for kind of showing what God's will is. Now, and that is completely normal. It's a wonderful thing. Now, the problem that happens is that anytime someone is put in a position like that, there is a danger that they do become idols. And that's a real thing, right? So a good example, of course, is in the story of Moses and Aaron, right? So Moses is called by God. God calls Moses and says, you are going to save the people out of Egypt. You're going to take them out of Egypt. You're going to bring them out, and they're going to be my people. And I'm going to give them my law, and they're going to be my people. And Moses is like, I can't do it on my own. I need some help. I'm just not the guy. And so God actually accepts to give him Aaron. And it's weird the way it's said in the text. It's actually almost scandalous if you think about it. Because God says to Moses, he said, I will be your God, and you will be Aaron's God. And he uses the word God. You know?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so obviously it doesn't mean that Moses was a God. Just to understand, it's like it's saying, you will receive from me, and then he will receive from you, and then he'll be like your voice. He'll be speaking out to you. So Aaron has this kind of intermediary position, right? This kind of he's kind of like a mediator, you could say, towards the people. But then as soon as Moses kind of goes up the mountain, what does Aaron do? He makes an idol.
Yeah.
And so he kind of, as soon as he's separated from his source, he makes an idol. That's a good way to understand it. So that's why, everybody complains about the pastors and the priests who become corrupt but it's the nature of the world that people who are put in authority, put in positions of power, are in danger of trying to take that power for themselves. Like the giants, right? To gather that power for themselves and to become arrogant and to want to receive the honor themselves. And so we have to be, of course, wary of that. Necessarily, we always have to be aware of that. We also have to understand that it is also the way that the world works, that it is also the way that God functions, that God chooses people, that God points to people, that God lifts people up and makes them, vehicles for his work. And so we just have to be, innocent as doves and wise as serpents. We have to be attentive, when we see a spiritual authority or we see a character who tries to take that power too much for themselves, or, starts to act in ways that are a little narcissistic or a little kind of power hungry, and then be able to kind of turn away from that. But in the case of the saints, what we have are people that fought the fight until the end, right? That basically ran the race until the end, and the testimony of their life has remained impeccable and shining. And so we know that they're no longer in danger of taking that power for themselves. It's like if you ask St. Peter to pray for you, he's no longer in the danger that your local pastor or your local priest is.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to, I don't actually know the Protestant argument for why do we ask other people to pray for us, but don't ask saints. And then my guess was because other people are living, but I literally have no idea. I'm so new in this, I don't even know what people would argue. That's the argument.
But the answer is that they have eternal life.
Yeah, okay.
They're not dead. They are alive, very much alive in Christ. That if you believe, if you live in Christ, then you will not die.
Okay, here's another question then. This doesn't really have anything to do with, well, maybe a little bit to do with that. So I was trying to figure out in Revelation, what happens biblically. Well, just biblically, what do people believe? What happens when you die? Is there this period before Jesus comes back where you're kind of asleep, but then, or do you just go directly to heaven?
So
I mean, I know no one can know.
Okay, yeah. So we have to be very cautious when we talk about these things, because obviously many of the things that are portrayed are extremely imagistic. Yeah. Right? And imagistic for a reason, because we're talking about things that we can't completely see. We see through a veil.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And so when, for example, when Christ describes the story of Lazarus and the rich man, he describes the story of someone who is just, Lazarus, who goes into the bosom of Abraham, which is already if you think this is literal, like, you have a bit of an issue. Like he goes back into Abraham's body, like he goes back into his bosom. No, it's like that's not what it means. It kind of means he goes back to his ancestor. He goes back to an origin that precedes him. He's kind of entered into something that is more than him. Maybe that's a good way of understanding it. And then the rich man, who never had any sympathy or any care for Lazarus, is put into a place of suffering and of fire. And so you can see that in Christ's parable, he seems to suggest that it's not like soul sleep. Soul sleep doesn't seem to be what he's suggesting here. And the same with the thief on the cross.
Yeah. It says, I'll see you today,
you will be
right?
with me in paradise, right? Of course, paradise and heaven are not the same thing. We could talk about that if you want to, but that's not the point. Is to say that at least traditional Christians, there was that discussion about that, because St. Paul uses the term those that have fallen asleep in the Lord, and that some people have taken that to mean something like soul sleep, but ultimately the church, because of those other examples, have come to the conclusion that no, let's take Christ's words over Paul's as a way to understand Paul, and that in fact we don't believe in that. So but then the way that people attempt to understand it is that in some ways there's a particular judgment and a universal judgment, that when you die you're judged particularly, and then in the end there's like a great judgment, that it's like the entire cosmos is judged, the final judgment. And in some ways those two things, I think the best way to understand them is that they're two aspects of the same thing, that the judgment that you go through after you die is not going to be different from the judgment at the end. Like it's the judgment of you, basically. When you, all through your life, you have the possibility of change. Right? That's what life is for. You can change, but once you get to the end, then that's it. That's you. It's like you're boxed up. Like this is Mikhaila. And
that's scary.
Yeah, that is scary.
You got to get on top of it right
right.
now.
That is scary. That's why there is an urgency to basically orienting ourselves properly, and understanding that our priorities need to be in the right place, because there is this, and it's not like this is something that everything is like that. Like everything is judged when it finishes. You tend not to judge something while it's happening. It's like you watch a movie and you kind of, maybe you like it, you don't like it, but you're like, I'm going to withhold judgment, unless it's really horrible. But most of the time you're like, I'll withhold judgment. And then when it's over, then it's like, okay, now I have the whole movie.
Yeah.
And now I can tell you if it was a good or a bad movie. And I think that's the way to understand people's lives. It's like once you're done, this has been the chance for you to kind of orient yourself properly. And so that tends to be the way that it's understood, is that then there is some kind of particular judgment that happens once you die. But it's a continuation of you. Like it's not. This is something that at least for more traditional Christians we kind of understand, is that when you die you're not going to become another person, right? If you are still attached to certain sins really strongly, or still attached to certain passions very strongly, then the fact that your body stops functioning isn't going to take that away. And so that's why also you kind of have to get through this stuff when you're alive, because when you die, then it's going to play out. You could say a good way to understand it, it's something like your body is actually a limit to the worst aspect of you. Right? Let's say you let yourself become really, really vengeful and resentful, and in your life, and you don't deal with that. You don't forgive, you don't deal with it, you just keep it boiling. Your body is actually a limit to that, right? Because your body will prevent you, and the reality of the physical world will prevent you from going to the end of your desires. But once your body is gone, then the limit's gone too.
Interesting.
And so then the desire becomes something like a fire that burns you, because you can't, it's like imagine you're hungry, but your body can't eat. but you're obsessed with eating. It's something that has, let's say, taken over your life, where it's like it's your only pleasure, it's your only joy, it's the thing that you centered on. And once your body's gone, then it's like a fire that burns you. It's a good way of understanding it. Like, it's a good way of understanding why we describe hell the way we do.
I mean, yeah, that's a good way of visualizing it.
And so it's actually love that's burning you in hell, right? It's also a good way of understanding it. It's like we're asked to love the right things in our life. We're asked to properly order our loves, and so you should love God, you should love your neighbor, you should love your family, you should love the people around you, and you are allowed to love beautiful things. You're allowed to have some type of, let's say, not just allowed, but it's good to enjoy a good meal, or to have a good time, or to, like, all these things are good. It's just they have to be in the right order, and that's all it is that the sin is when you put loves in the wrong order, right? Because it's like, sex is a good thing. It's when it's in the wrong place that it becomes a problem. When you put it above if you put sex above, let's say, the true love of a family united, then all hell breaks loose. Then people cheat on each other, then everything becomes crazy. And so that's the way to understand it. But it's love that burns you in hell, because it's the fact that so you could understand sometimes this is even extreme, but some of the Orthodox saints have said that the fire in hell is the love of God, and that the love, that the fire of Pentecost, right, the fire of the Holy Spirit that comes down on the disciples, that it's the same fire that's burning in hell. It's just that if you love the proper thing, like if you love God, if you love others, if you forgive, if you live a life that is transparent to God, then the fire will consume you in the right way, will, like, bring you up, right? Will kind of push you up into the...
That's so interesting.
And so you see that, like, there are even some modern, like C.S. Lewis talks about that. He kind of presents heaven and hell that way. I think it's the best way.
So like the same place, but people react to it differently,
like
based on their
like
aim,
that.
almost?
Based on what it is that they love.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So think about it, like, a good way of understanding it too. I've used this example, which is that imagine that you do something really horrible to someone, right? And then that person answers you with love. And so you're faced with this person. This person basically forgives you, welcomes you with open arms. And in that moment, you have two choices. You can accept that, or you can refuse that. You can let it go, and you can move into the embrace, or you can say, you can be even more angry at the person, even more resentful. And then that person's love will burn you. It's like St. Paul talks about, coals being shoveled on your head. And that's a real thing, and people experience that all the time. And it's the same again with any love that we have. We could already experience hell a little bit in this world when we don't get what we want, and then we get angry, and then we let that kind of consume us. And it's like, especially if what you want is your dinner on time or whatever, or some ridiculous detail about life that really is secondary. When you let that consume you, it's like that's love consuming you. And that's love burning you, but it's the wrong love. It's the love that's pointed in the wrong direction, because you really want that, whatever it is that you want. You can't get it, so you're touching hell there.
Wow, crazy. Yeah. You said C.S. Lewis talked about this?
Yeah.
A little?
Yeah, he has a book called The Great Divorce.
Okay.
It's a beautiful book. It's kind of like his version of Dante's comedy. Really? Yeah, well, it's different, but in some ways he gets taken into the afterlife, or into the world of heaven and hell, and his guide is actually George MacDonald, which is hilarious. George MacDonald is one of the great fairy tale writers in the history. He kind of precedes C.S. Lewis in that fantasy type storytelling, and even Tolkien too.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he's a great. George MacDonald is wonderful.
I haven't heard of George MacDonald. Actually.
People don't know him that well, but he really is at the outset of what we think of today as kind of modern fantasy and modern fairy tales. Yeah, and so that's his guide in the afterlife, and then C.S. Lewis really explains how in fact hell is something that people do to themselves. So for example, like a good example, it's basically saying like in the afterlife you get everything you want, kind of like that. But sometimes if you don't want the right thing, that you'll also get it. And so he explains how there's a place in hell where people, it's as big as you want, like it's huge, and you can have an amazing house, right? So people like build these amazing houses, but then what happens is that they get in a fight with their neighbor. And so then they can do whatever they want. So they build their house further away from that neighbor because they don't want to fight. But then then they fight with the other neighbor and the other neighbor. And then what they do is they keep building their beautiful mansion further and further away from each other. And then at some point, they're millions of miles from each other and just living in their beautiful mansion completely alone, without any relation, without any friends, without anybody around them, and basically just living in that kind of frustrated resentment, So it's like this idea that, yeah, you can get anything you want, but if you don't want the right thing.
I've definitely heard of this before. I've heard of that idea. I wonder if it was from C.S. Lewis, or is this idea propagated in other ways? I've definitely heard of the hell being you have everything you want.
Yeah.
And
I think that it's an image. It's a story. It's an image that's also it's propagated in different ways. Dante in his book, he basically suggests that. He suggests that the people in hell want to be there. Like if you go to hell, it's because you want to go to hell. It's not that God is just putting you there arbitrarily because you for this or that reason.
Yeah.
It's because you're living in a passion that devours you. So there's one image in Dante's Hell, for example, where it's two lovers, that basically cheated on their spouse to be together, and they're so caught up in their passion for each other that they're like the swirling flame that never stops, and they have nowhere to rest, and they're like just kind of dancing in this fire, and they got what they want, but they became drunk on it, and it consumed them, and now it's a form of suffering.
Wow, that's dark. That's horrifying. I need to familiarize myself with that. I wanted to find somebody on Peterson Academy to do Dante.
Yeah,
that would be good. And C.S. Lewis.
All those would be amazing. They're really the foundation of Western civilization. I got a great guy for Dante if you're interested.
You do?
Yeah. We could talk about it.
Okay, fantastic.
And I'm really excited about what you're doing at Peterson Academy, by the way.
Thank you.
And it's astounding. I mean, it's really, I remember when the dates, when it wasn't happening and you kept putting off the dates. I was like, what's going on? I hope everything's okay.
We had a rough summer.
But then when it came out, then I was like, oh, okay. They wanted it to be perfect. They wanted it to be just great. And it turns out that that's the case. And yeah, you guys are doing a great job. And I think that really is a possibility to use that to kind of reset some of these stories, to kind of help people recapture some of the things that we've forgotten. And Dante is one of them. I mean, Dante, the comedy is one of the greatest texts ever written. And so when people don't know it, people just read the Inferno.
Yeah.
Everybody just reads the hell part, because it's closer to us. We understand the hell part. Isn't that weird? We totally understand the hell part, but it's we don't actually. We did our own version of a Dante class on the symbolic world, and we just did Purgatory, and it's beautiful. It's actually amazing. It's actually better than hell, because it's this mountain that goes up to the earthly paradise, and there are way more insight, really powerful insights in that. So, yeah, it's worth anybody who hasn't read the comedy. You have to read the comedy. It's one of the things you have to read.
Okay, we'll talk about that after this podcast. And if people want to find you, they should go to the Symbolic
Go to
World.
symbolicworld.com. And like I said, if you want, just sign up for our mailing list. We're trying to consolidate people so we can keep them informed. And we're offering free PDFs of some of the books.
These books are really nice, though.
And then,
to
but then obviously
have.
that's what we also think, that
They're
if
really
people
nice.
see some of the digital versions, they'll just want to get the real thing.
Yeah,
because
they're nice and like hefty and like
heavy pages,
yeah.
well printed, like everything about it is complete. How can I say that? We like end pages. We just really took the time to
you can
do
tell
it as well as we could. So,
you
and we're gonna put out 6 more at least. So
that's so cool.
every 6 months. That's the goal.
Really?
Every 6 months. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. So the next one is already half finished. We're doing Rapunzel.
Nice.
And then we're doing the Valiant Little Tailor, trying to do girls and boys. Yeah. And then one of the things you can already kind of get the idea is that one of the things we're doing is that we're actually going to bring the stories into each other. And so we're going to tell the actual story.
Okay.
And so you can imagine that if the story of the Valiant Little Tailor is also about giants, and so there'll be a connection with Jack, like there'll be this connection that's going to appear in the story. So I think that'll be fun for people.
That is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, a box set would be lovely.
For
These
sure
individual ones are beautiful. Yeah, congratulations. They look great. And thank you for the copies.
No, you're welcome. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks,
It
Mikhaila.
was nice to see you again.
It's great, as usual.